Before he left, he advised me, "Be magnanimous, marriage will come sooner or later, but Vivian's dysmenorrhea is getting worse and could even be life-threatening." He left without looking back, leaving me alone to be mocked by the guests. I turned and took his brother's hand, and we got married smoothly. 3 years later, he returned to the country to offer me charity. "Considering your service to my parents-in-law, I can also have a child with you. When shall we go get the certificate?" I held my daughter and waved my hand. I just finished my confinement, so I politely declined. Today is the wedding of Ethan and me. The luxurious banquet hall is filled with guests, and the officiant is reading the opening remarks for the vow ceremony. Ethan looks around, appearing distracted. "Groom, may I ask if you are willing to take Miss Nora as your wife?" Ethan's phone suddenly rang. He eagerly answered it. Secretary Vivian's delicate voice spread throughout the venue through the microphone. "Ethan, I'm so sorry, I was supposed to attend your wedding with Nora, but I'm just in too much pain, Ignoring the astonished expressions of the guests, Ethan anxiously asked, "Vivian, did your period come early?" Vivian, her voice barely a whisper, replied, "It's okay, I wish you happiness, Ethan. I can take care of myself." Ethan frowned with concern. "Wait for me, I'll take you to the hospital right away." After hanging up the phone, he immediately notified everyone that the wedding was on hold. I forced a smile, accustomed to the situation, and advised, "I'll have someone pick up Vivian, it won't be too late for you to leave after the wedding is over. Don't keep so many guests waiting." Ethan was ignited by my words, glaring at me with annoyance. "Nora, it's one thing to look down on Vivian usually, but as a woman, can't you have a bit of compassion?" He shook off my hand and lifted his leg to leave. Mr. Henry, with a pale face, blocked Ethan. "Unfilial son, stop right there." Ethan threw back a line, "I will voluntarily accept the family punishment," and turned to leave. Whispers arose from the audience. Poor Nora, her parents had passed away not long ago, and on her wedding day, her husband abandoned her for another woman. Who told her to insist on this marriage? Ethan had already stood her up for the engagement party. Fortunately, the wedding planning company quickly organized a few games to divert the guests' attention. Not long after, I came across Vivian's Instagram. She posted 2 pictures with the caption, "The one who loves you will always rush to see you under the stars and moon." One picture shows Ethan's hand gently massaging her lower abdomen. The other is a pair of plane tickets to the United States and an introduction to a medical institution. I recognized this as the world's top artificial insemination facility. The call to Ethan was rejected. I had no choice but to call Vivian, urging Ethan to come back quickly. "I'm sorry, Nora, Ethan said he would take me abroad for treatment, and I really couldn't refuse him." Her tone lifted at the end, unable to hide her excitement. I rubbed my temples in pain. "Does he know there are still hundreds waiting here?" Ethan snatched the phone and said disdainfully, "Be generous, Nora. Marriage can happen sooner or later, but Vivian's menstrual pain is getting worse and could even be life-threatening. The doctor said pregnancy could help, and once she gets better, I'll come back. Vivian is not sick at all." But I still said in a gentle tone, "I am investing $30 million in the research center, and the special painkiller will be on the market soon, no need to go through so much trouble to go abroad." Ethan sneered, "You're not afraid that Vivian is pregnant with my child, are you? She and I are completely innocent." I feel like I've heard the biggest joke. Ethan, who once swore he would marry no one but me, has slowly changed since Vivian appeared. Her monthly period makes Ethan feel like he's facing a formidable enemy. While I drink to the point of gastric bleeding for social obligations, he is busy making brown sugar water for Vivian. At the engagement banquet, he went out to seek medical help for Vivian and ultimately could only attend online. Ethan, who could even forget my parents' burial date, was intimately familiar with Vivian's menstrual cycle. Every single thing is suspicious. I said to Ethan, "If you don't come back now, then don't bother getting married." He scoffed disdainfully and said, "I hate it when others threaten me." Ethan hung up without a word, clearly not taking my words to heart. Mrs. Grace, who listened to the whole thing, was frustrated. This kid is just not as worry-free as his brother. From now on, I'll consider him dead. The unexpected death of my parents caused turmoil in the group, and I urgently needed to stabilize people's hearts through a marriage alliance. But Ethan chose this critical moment to run away from the wedding. A man in an elegant suit strode into the room. Ethan's older brother Adrian was impressive in appearance, tall and straight, exuding a strong sense of authority with every gesture. He asked, "How is it?" I shook my head. Mr. Henry sighed deeply. "Nora, our family has wronged you." I clenched my fists. "In fact, there is a way to restore the dignity of both our families." The three of them looked over curiously. I recall every time I was alone with Adrian, his deep-set eyes unwaveringly gazing at me. I steeled myself and said, "Actually, as long as there is a groom, it can be anyone." Mrs. Grace slapped her thigh and said, "I thought from the beginning that you and Adrian were a better match. It's all Ethan's fault for butting in with his bad luck." Mr. Henry pondered for a moment and agreed, "Adrian is mature and reserved, and Nora will never be wronged." Adrian did not object. That night, as the newlyweds walked hand in hand into the hall, he held on tightly. With determination and steadiness, he promised me what Ethan had not said out loud, "I do." After finishing the wedding, the portrait hasn't been retouched yet. I first posted the wedding photos with the double happiness character on Instagram. It was clearly a festive scene, but Ethan misunderstood and thought I was playing the victim. He was so exasperated that he left 3 comments in a row. "Nora, what do you mean by sending these photos?" Vivian felt so guilty after seeing them that she was almost in tears. "You pretend to be a forsaken woman, but who are you trying to elicit pity from? Don't think I don't know, you just want to gain my sympathy. If you pretend not to see it again, do you believe I will completely regret the marriage? Hurry up and delete it." I feel annoyed by the endless messages. To completely cut ties with Ethan, I privately messaged him to warn, "Vivian is nothing, she isn't even worthy to comment on my Instagram. I am already married, and the groom is your brother, so you should treat me with more respect." Ethan clearly didn't believe it. "You should at least draft your lies. My brother is not interested in women, let alone with you. Provocation won't work on me. If you don't behave, the wedding will be postponed for a year." I directly sent him a screenshot of the news. Ethan was silent for a while. "You really went all out, and you even got the media in the whole city to cooperate with your act." Adrian saw me standing there, staring at my phone, and took the initiative to ask, "What's wrong?" I pushed the screen in front of him. Adrian's expression was stern after reading, and he directly sent a voice message to Ethan. "Nora will be your sister-in-law from now on, don't cause her any trouble." His low tone revealed his displeasure. Ethan was oblivious, still shouting recklessly. "Bro, stop talking. I know you're just playing along with Nora. She loves me to death, how could she possibly turn around and marry someone else? You don't need to speak for her, I'll make it up to her tomorrow." Adrian's eyes grew increasingly sullen, his thin lips pressed into a straight line. He looked as if a storm was about to break. "Are you trying to charm my wife?" I felt a bit embarrassed thinking that Adrian might care, to some extent, about what happened between me and his brother. I turned my head away shyly. However, he just sighed lightly and said, "Nora, I have wronged you." He turned around and instructed his assistant to cancel Ethan's credit card. Ding, I've received a text notification. Adrian transferred a large sum of money to me. After dealing with the company's tricky matters, Mr. Henry and Mrs. Grace urged Adrian and me to go on our honeymoon. Crossing the Pacific, the small town in the southern hemisphere is in the midst of summer, with plenty of sunshine. Adrian is attentive and considerate. We explore the mountains and waters, getting along harmoniously, and our feelings quickly deepen. One day, while Adrian was at an international conference, I went to the mall alone to choose a wedding ring. The previous ring size didn't fit Adrian. I planned to give him a surprise. A man and a woman walked into the jewelry store, carefully selecting items. The man pushed a shopping cart filled with baby products. The woman sweetly leaned on the man's shoulder. Ethan recognized me in front of the counter. He angrily stepped forward and pushed me hard. Nora, how dare you follow me? I lost my balance and fell directly to the ground. Vivian gently stroked her belly, her eyes filled with pride. Is everything okay, Nora? I'm a pregnant woman now and can't bend down, can you get up by yourself? The kind-hearted clerk helped me up. Ethan ripped the pendant from his chest and questioned me, did you put a tracker inside? That is the consecrated jade I earnestly prayed for to protect me from disaster and safeguard my life. I reached out to take it, if you don't want it, then return it to me. Ethan wore a triumphant smile. In the moment my fingertips touched it, I slammed it heavily to the ground. The fine jade shattered into pieces, and there was no sign of the locator. Even if I let go of my feelings for Ethan, when the past affections are trampled upon, I still feel a bit stunned. Ethan saw my red-rimmed eyes and immediately panicked, saying, it's just a piece of jade, I'll pay you for it. He caught a glimpse of the high-end jewelry in the display window. I'll buy you this set, no, I'll buy out the whole store and give it to you, how about that? Vivian bit her lip in jealousy. I couldn't take it anymore, pointing at the door and shouting at the two of them, get out. Ethan's face turned pale. Vivian tugged at his sleeve to remind him, Ethan, we need to go for the prenatal checkup. Before leaving, Ethan said, Nora, don't throw a tantrum. At worst, I'll come back early to marry you. I hobbled home. On the way, Vivian kept sending me messages. Nora, don't blame Ethan, it's my fault for saying the air here is good, and he insisted on bringing me over to take care of the baby. Have you been to the nearby Lover's Lake? I heard that couples who check in together can be happy forever, but I wonder if it will work if you go alone. As soon as I entered, Adrian was waiting for me. His gaze was fixed on my knee. How did you get hurt? After all, Ethan is Adrian's younger brother, and I didn't want to put him in a difficult position. I lied, claiming I had accidentally fallen and handed him the gift I brought for him. Adrian didn't say much, leaning down to tend to my wound. The next day, I found the piece of jade that had been pieced together at the head of my bed. The television was broadcasting news about a Chinese man and woman being deported for carrying contraband. Even though the photo was blurred, I could still recognize that it was Ethan and Vivian. I contacted Adrian, who went to buy breakfast. I found that he had changed his profile picture to a photo of us holding hands with wedding rings on. Is it okay to treat Ethan this way? Adrian quickly replied. As long as he's not dead. I don't want our honeymoon to be disturbed. My heart skipped a beat. Indeed, being with the right person will never lead to feeling wronged. After the honeymoon, I quickly became pregnant. The whole family was very happy. Throughout the 10 months of pregnancy, Adrian took care of me meticulously. When his son was born, the usually calm and composed Adrian rarely lost his composure. He was busy buying property and giving expensive jewelry, repeatedly saying that I had worked hard. He takes care of the child with great attention, almost doing everything himself. When the child has a fever and a rash, he often notices it even earlier than the nanny. As the new year approached, the general manager of the overseas branch suddenly announced his resignation, and Adrian needed to go on a business trip. He apologized to me, honey, I can't spend the new year with you. I waved my hand to indicate it was fine, with my parents here, you can rest assured. After getting married, Mr. Henry, who already cared for me, and Mrs. Grace treated me like their own daughter even more. Before I had even returned home, they had already started buying the ingredients I love to eat. On New Year's Eve, we were having our reunion dinner. Ethan suddenly returned, looking worn out, with a baby in his arms. Mom and Dad, long time no see, I brought our family's eldest grandson back to see you. Mr. Henry saw the baby in the swaddling cloth, his face turning red with anger. Where did this wild child come from, daring to claim to be one of my family? Ethan proudly said, it's Vivian who gave birth to him, Mom, don't you think he's adorable? Seeing Ethan coming with the child, Mrs. Grace looked disgusted. Go away, I won't acknowledge a child of unknown origin. Ethan was turned away twice, and his face looked grim. He finally noticed me at the table and instantly exploded with rage. Nora, Did you slander me in front of my parents? I ignored him and quietly ate the food Mrs. Grace had given me. Mrs. Grace helped me out. Ethan, you are too outrageous. How dare you bully Nora in front of me? For more than half a year, you haven't even called to check in. It's been Nora by our side, caring for us. I don't have a son as ungrateful as you. Ethan understood that he had misunderstood me, and his expression softened. He rubbed his nose awkwardly and said, serving one's parents-in-law is her duty, there's nothing to boast about. Mr. Henry was furious to see that he showed no signs of remorse. Get out of here. Ethan retorted, I don't even care to stay. At his shout, the baby in his arms and the son in the cradle beside me both cried out in fright. Hearing the two cries, Ethan was stunned. He stared blankly at Andy in the cradle, who resembled Adrian, and asked in a panic, Nora, whose child is this? You said before that you married my brother, that's not true, right? What do you mean not true? Andy is Nora and your brother's child, what are you spacing out for? Mrs. Grace shot Ethan a glare. Ethan's expression shattered in an instant, he looked at me in disbelief and left without turning back, holding the child. That night I received a message from Ethan. Nora, my mom was lying to me today, right? You take care of my brother's kids every day, you must be envious, right? As long as you acknowledge William as your own son, I can marry you. I replied. I didn't expect that so much time had passed, and Ethan still thought I was infatuated with him. Ethan continued, are you jealous? I could also consider giving you a chance to be a mother. I was too lazy to get entangled with him again, so I just blocked him. I guess Ethan must be short on money. He has always been proud and wouldn't easily bow his head, which is why he suddenly came back with the child. He approached me privately, hoping that I could say some good words in front of Mr. Henry and Mrs. Grace. I'm not that kind-hearted. Let him waste away outside. I want to see what the young master, who is usually so extravagant, will use to support a child. After I blocked him, Ethan never contacted me again. In his eyes, my audacity to refuse his charity, which I had always accepted with humility, was equivalent to slapping his face. He must still be sulking, waiting for me to. Unfortunately, I had long since put this trivial matter out of my mind. With the child, Adrian and I's relationship steadily improved. When the eldest was over a year old, I became pregnant again. This time, I gave birth to a little princess. The whole family was so happy they almost went crazy, and they immediately decided to hold a luxurious full-month banquet. On the day of the banquet, all the city's elites came. Everyone praised Adrian for being fortunate to marry a good wife who balances both career and family. Usually serious and unsmiling, Adrian was now holding me and grinning from ear to ear. Under the grand introduction of my grandparents, my daughter was about to make her appearance. Suddenly, a woman holding a child burst in. In front of everyone, she urged the child to come forward. William, quickly call them Grandpa and Grandma. After several years apart, Vivian looked haggard and unrecognizable. Her figure had changed, and there were several more wrinkles on her face. In contrast, I was in a much better state than before, free from the troubles brought by Ethan. Mr. Henry's face turned pale, and he signaled the security to take the person away. Vivian looked pitiful. She suddenly knelt on the ground, refusing to get up no matter what. The confused guests began to whisper among themselves. Adrian's expression was grim, and it seemed he was about to explode. I stopped him and directly projected Vivian's provocative chat records and Instagram posts onto the public screen. Soon, curses erupted from below. How shameless of that vile mistress to dare come to the door to claim kinship. The second young master of the Fu family must be blind to choose such a low-class woman. The melon peel and fruit scraps were thrown at her from the audience. Vivian's face turned red and then pale. But since she was already kneeling, she wouldn't give up until she achieved her goal, so she could only grit her teeth and endure in silence. Ethan then arrived at the banquet hall. Upon seeing Ethan, Vivian cried out, "Ethan, William is about to start kindergarten, and I have no choice." Ethan, with eyes full of pain, helped the person up. Vivian, it was my stubbornness that made you suffer. He took a deep breath and said solemnly to Mr. Henry and Mrs. Grace, Mom and Dad, running away from the wedding is my fault, but Vivian and the child are innocent. I hope you won't blame them. Then Ethan slowly walked towards me and compromised, Nora, you win. For the sake of your service to my parents, I can also have a child with you. When shall we go get the certificate? His tone was filled with reluctance and helplessness, as if he had suffered a great humiliation. Mrs. Grace was utterly astonished. Mr. Henry was trembling with anger, unfilial son, what nonsense are you talking about? The guests burst into laughter. Ethan was puzzled, I am willing to marry Nora, you can restore my credit card now. I held my daughter and said, sorry, I just finished my confinement, so I have to decline. Ethan warned me, Nora, using the same trick twice isn't fresh anymore, you need to know your limits when throwing a tantrum. Adrian asked with a gloomy face, is that so, brother? The next moment, I was enveloped in Adrian's warm embrace. He gently kissed my hair, leaving his unique mark by my ear. It was like a blow to the head. Ethan was stunned for a few seconds before finally coming to his senses. He held his head and shouted frantically, Nora is my fiancé. Adrian sneered, she is now my wife, if you don't cherish her, naturally someone else will cherish her. Ethan didn't dare to challenge his brother, so he turned to me and said fiercely, Nora, you should wait for me to come back, not go after my brother. Adrian corrected him, Nora is fine, it was my initiative. Ethan stepped back in disbelief. I retorted to Ethan, how can you still have the face to make me wait for you after publicly abandoning me for another woman? How many 3-year periods are there in life? If you never come back, am I supposed to wait for you my whole life? But you love me, don't you? Aren't I the only one for you? How could you bear to marry someone else? Ethan's voice carried a hint of barely perceptible tremor. I replied coolly, little brother-in-law, you have overstepped. Ethan could not accept this fact. For him, my letting go was rarer than the end of the world. Vivian saw that something was wrong and stepped forward to pull at Ethan. Ethan suddenly shook off her hand, glaring at her in anger, it's all your fault. If it weren't for you being abroad for so long, Nora wouldn't have chosen someone else. Vivian was extremely aggrieved, tears streaming down her face. It's me who's in the way, I'll take William away immediately. She wanted to take the child beside her away. William shook his head desperately, lying on the ground crying and throwing a tantrum. I won't leave, you said if you called Grandpa and Grandma I could get Ultraman, I want Ultraman. In the end, Vivian had no choice but to forcibly carry the child away. Ethan claimed he would cut off contact with Vivian. Mr. Henry and Mrs. Grace then allowed him to enter the house. The heavy news of my relationship with Adrian left Ethan in a slump for several days. Until one day, when no one was around, he looked at me with a pained expression. Nora, there's no need for you to be impulsive in our quarrel. You have no feelings for my brother, yet you play the part for real and have 2 children with him. A dog's mouth can't spit out ivory. I directly slapped him, if you have the guts, say it in front of your brother. He covered his face and coughed awkwardly. We all have children, so let's call it even. I don't mind you, once you cool down, divorce my brother, and I am willing to marry you. Sometimes, I really want to open Ethan's head and see if it's filled with excrement. He really thinks of himself as the beloved golden boy, what about Vivian? Ethan didn't catch my sarcasm. He assured me, I only feel guilt towards her, not romantic feelings. It was I who made her drink and harmed her health, otherwise, I wouldn't have cared for her. I won't say yes or no, I simply pushed aside the hair that was covering my neck, revealing the ambiguous red marks. What a pity, I really do like your brother. Ethan's pupils trembled, and a bitter smile curled at the corners of his mouth. Then I am willing to wait for you to change your mind. I didn't take his words to heart. That night, Vivian called Ethan. Ethan, William has a high fever, but after taking the fever-reducing medicine, he had an allergic reaction. I'm so scared. After hearing this, Ethan left the villa in a rush. Before leaving, he glanced at me with a guilty conscience. William is my flesh and blood, I cannot ignore him. Mr. Henry and Mrs. Grace were so angry that they cursed loudly, stating they would no longer recognize Ethan as their son. Ethan also wisely did not come back. 2 months later, my son Andy reached the age to start kindergarten. Coincidentally, Vivian and Ethan's son William was in the same class as Andy. Worried about any accidents, I specifically asked the principal to place the 2 children in different classes. One afternoon, the homeroom teacher suddenly called to inform that Andy had hurt another child and made them bleed while playing. When I arrived at the kindergarten, Vivian was crying like a rain-soaked pear blossom while holding William. The wound on William's forehead had not been treated at all, exposed to the air. I frowned and first took the child to the hospital. Vivian excitedly swatted my hand away. "Nora, I know you hate me, but I didn't expect you to incite the child to bully William. You must give me an explanation for what happened today." Andy pouted in grievance upon hearing this, clutching my shirt hem and proactively explaining, "Mom, I didn't do anything wrong, he bumped into it himself." Andy has always been sensible and would never resort to violence. Moreover, William is older and a head taller than Andy, so it wouldn't be fair to fight back. William cried out, "Andy is lying, he hit me. I demand to check the surveillance." The homeroom teacher awkwardly stated that the incident occurred in a blind spot of the cameras, and it was impossible to confirm what happened at that time. Vivian, however, believed that we were colluding to protect each other and shouted that she would sue everyone. Ethan rushed over. He unceremoniously accused Vivian, "Aren't you embarrassed enough from last time? I told you I would find a way to have the child recognize their parent, no need for you to worry about it." No wonder she was unwilling to take the child to the hospital, it turns out she had other motives. Vivian was not embarrassed when Ethan exposed her. She directly threatened me, "Nora, you better bring William home to acknowledge his roots, or I will ruin your son's reputation." Ethan was dissatisfied and was about to explode. William suddenly burrowed into his arms and whined, "Daddy, it hurts so much." A flicker of heartache passed through Ethan's eyes. He hesitated for a moment and walked in front of me. "Nora, William doesn't have as many people who care for him as Andy does, he only has his mom and dad. I'm not asking you to do anything, just apologize to Andy, and we can let this go." I said coldly, "Dream on." Ethan frowned. He advised me, "Why be so aggressive? Can't we all take a step back?" I said, "Apologizing is equivalent to admitting that Andy did something wrong. How will others view my son in the future? The school has no evidence, but I do. The pendant that Andy often wore after enrolling had surveillance capabilities. I played the video from that time directly. William grabbed Andy's sleeve and wouldn't let go, deliberately hitting his forehead with a stone, then crying uncontrollably to attract the teacher's attention. Everyone present looked at each other in confusion. William sensed that the situation was dire and fainted. Although we could tell he was acting, just in case, we still took him to the hospital. Fortunately, William was not seriously hurt. Without an adult to guide him, it is difficult for a 3-year-old to entrap others like this. Seeing Ethan silent, Vivian's face turned pale. She whispered in defense, "I did this for the sake of the child to recognize their roots and receive better care." Adrian, who arrived just in time, raised the report in his hand. Vivian had a low character, and was a first-rate liar. Adrian had the doctor add a paternity test to William's physical examination. The results showed that William and Ethan had no blood relation at all. Ethan's hand trembled like a sieve as he held the report. He was furious and slapped Vivian hard. "You shameless woman, how dare you deceive me?" Ethan was furious. In front of the child, he punched and kicked Vivian. "It's all your fault for making me run away from my wedding, for missing the woman I love, for making me unable to return home, and now you want me to support your illegitimate child." Vivian was beaten so badly that her face was bruised. She indignantly said, "It's still because your sperm is too poor, otherwise, I would have gotten pregnant long ago." Ethan, humiliated and angry, struck her even harder. It is said that Vivian was unable to get out of bed for a week because of the beating. William also dropped out of school because of this. Ethan clung to me like a piece of sticky tape. I didn't want to be entangled with him anymore, my attitude cold and distant. I focused on living my little life with Adrian. Adrian often creates little surprises for me when he's not busy. Sometimes it's a candlelight dinner, and other times it's taking me to enjoy fireworks. We've been married for 3 years and are still as sweet as we were at the beginning. My differential treatment made Ethan very frustrated. He spent all day lurking in the company lobby. When he saw me, he eagerly rushed over. I held a familiar jade pendant in my hand. "Nora, can you see if this piece of jade is exactly the same as the one that was broken back then?" I pushed his hand away and said coldly, "Brother-in-law, don't waste my time at work." The front desk called me. "Boss, someone sent you a bouquet of flowers. Red tulips, symbolizing passionate, everlasting love." I held the flowers Adrian gave me, smiling sweetly. This scene deeply pierced Ethan. He looked hurt all over. "A bunch of cheap flowers can bring you a smile, so why don't you appreciate the jade pendant I begged for from the foot of the mountain to the peak?" I glanced at Ethan and said calmly, "The value of a gift depends on the giver. You know very well the value of the jade pendant, yet you didn't hesitate to break it, so you don't deserve to make me happy." Ethan's face showed some discomfort. "I admit that I went a bit overboard before, but I am making amends, and I even taught Vivian a lesson for you. Isn't that enough to calm you down?" I immediately distanced myself from the situation. "I don't care about you and Vivian at all. It was clearly her who made you angry by cheating on you, so don't pin your reasons for hitting women on me. I don't care for your compensation, please stay away from me and don't disturb the happy life of our family." Ethan suddenly broke down. He questioned me hoarsely and desperately, "What is it about my brother that makes you so devoted to him? He is rigid and lacks charm, anything he can do, I can do too." I interrupted him directly, "He is completely the opposite of you, I love him very much, and we are already married." Ethan was dismissive, saying, "So what if you get married? You can always get a divorce." I was annoyed to the point of a headache by him. Ethan continued, "As long as you agree, we can have an even grander wedding than before, and I will treat you better than I did before." He became more and more agitated as he spoke. He didn't notice that Adrian was walking over. "Ethan, are you trying to steal my girl?" Adrian said coldly, his eyes filled with a chilling glare. The innate bloodline suppression turned Ethan into a quail in an instant. He stammered, unable to utter a complete sentence. "No, no." In the next moment, Adrian's fist swung towards Ethan's face. "Do you still want Nora to be embarrassed again?" Ethan didn't dare to retaliate, not even to make a sound, and could only grit his teeth and endure. Adrian overpowered him, landing punch after punch until Ethan was knocked to the ground. He pointed at the blood oozing from Ethan's mouth and warned, "If you keep bothering Nora, don't blame me for disregarding our brotherhood." I held Adrian's hand. "Honey, don't fight anymore." When Ethan saw me trying to mediate, a glimmer of hope lit up in his eyes. "I knew you still cared about me." Little did he know, I was just holding Adrian's hand, concernedly checking it. "Is your hand okay? Does it hurt?" Adrian's disdainful gaze met Ethan's hesitance. It struck a heavy blow to Ethan's confidence. He felt like a deflated balloon, leaving in a dejected manner. Ethan was despondent, spending all day getting drunk at the bar. His credit card had been suspended, and his savings had been nearly exhausted. Ethan had no choice but to rely on face recognition to buy on credit and hold on. His existence turned the Fu family into a joke. Mr. Henry and Mrs. Grace were already utterly disappointed in this son and soon announced to the outside world that they would kick him out of the house. All the bars in the city blacklisted Ethan and demanded that he settle his debts. Ethan, with no way out, could only work 3 jobs a day to pay off his debts. His plight did not evoke any sympathy from his family. Mrs. Grace understands the big picture, it's good that she kicked this spendthrift out early. If he were still at home, the 2 little ones would surely learn bad habits. I covered my mouth and laughed, with so many people caring for and loving them, the children won't go astray. One day, the nanny took her daughter out to bask in the sun and didn't return for a long time. When they realized something was wrong, the daughter had already gone missing. The whole family was in a state of panic. I suddenly received a strange text message. "If you want your daughter to live, come alone to the dock warehouse." When I arrived at the dock, Vivian was holding her crying daughter Alma tightly. Behind her was the turbulent river. My heart was tightly knotted. I raised my hands high and said sincerely, "Calm down, put the child down, and let's talk things over. Whether you want money or my life, we can negotiate." Vivian couldn't stop sneering. "Nora, I didn't expect you to have a day when you would bow to me." I was afraid of provoking her, so I lowered my stance and quietly listened. Vivian's gaze was filled with resentment. Clearly, Ethan's whole heart was tied to me. Clearly, I was so close to becoming a daughter-in-law of the Fu family, and my son would also be the young master of the Fu family. "Why did you have to destroy my happiness?" Vivian took another step closer to the riverbank. "If you want to save your daughter, then kneel on the ground and crawl 3 circles, barking like a dog as you crawl." I know very well that I can't reason with a madman. While counting down to the start of the rescue, I prepare to obediently follow orders. Ethan suddenly sprang out from nowhere. With lightning speed, he lunged at Vivian, forcing her to let go. I took the opportunity to carry Alma away, distancing myself from the two. Vivian's face twisted in anger. She drew the dagger hidden in her boot and stabbed fiercely at Ethan's thigh. Ethan quickly became too weak from blood loss to fight back. Yet he still held on to Vivian tightly. Ethan weakly shouted at me, "Don't worry about me, you run." Vivian's eyes were crimson, like a demon crawling out of hell. "What kind of potion did Nora feed you to make you willing to die for her?" In her anger, she stabbed several times. "Mom, what are you doing?" A childish voice interrupted Vivian's actions. Vivian looked up in shock, meeting William's bewildered gaze. The police seized the moment, kicking the dagger out of her hand and restraining her. Ethan was covered in blood. He lay on the stretcher, looking at me with deep concern, asking, "Are you okay?" When he saw me shake my head, he finally relaxed and passed out. Adrian frowned. He was clearly displeased with his brother's reckless heroics. Ethan's sudden appearance with William disrupted the rescue operation, nearly causing it to fail, and he himself was injured as a result. Before Vivian was taken away, she kept comforting William. "Don't be afraid, William, Mommy was just playing a game." She reached out her hand to rub the child's head. William immediately felt scared and hid behind the police. Vivian dropped her hands in disappointment, her face full of regret. I said beside him, "I have never targeted you. But there is a saying, those who commit many injustices will surely bring about their own demise." Vivian chuckled at herself. "Nora, I'm not as good at reading people as you are. I mistook trash for treasure. What awaits her is years of imprisonment." Ethan injured his leg and could only accompany a wheelchair for the rest of his life. He couldn't accept the reality and angrily drove away all the visitors. In helplessness, his friends and family had no choice but to ask me to visit him. Ethan's gloomy face finally showed a hint of brightness. "Nora, I thought you wouldn't come." I explained, "I am just here on behalf of the family to care for you, with no ulterior motives." Ethan couldn't hide his disappointment. "Do you really have to be so heartless towards me?" I sighed. "A broken mirror is hard to piece back together. Ever since you decided to run away from the wedding, we could never be again." I set the fruit basket down. "Take good care of yourself and pull yourself together." Ethan's eyes turned red. He grasped my hand, trying to capture the friendship of the past from my eyes. "If I hadn't felt sympathy for Vivian back then and had married you instead, would we be happy now?" I calmly broke free from his shackles. "There are no ifs, I am doing well now." "Ethan, look ahead." I left without looking back. 5th year of marriage. Adrian and I revisited the small town where we spent our honeymoon on our anniversary. A new boardwalk has been built by Lover's Lake. As long as you tell the staff a love story, you can exchange it for a heart-shaped lock. Adrian told a little-known story. At the age of 10, he discovered a stray cat at school, and another girl was feeding it at the same time. At 20, he visited friends with his parents. In that household, he saw the girl playing with the long-lost cat. Her smile was innocent, shining into his heart like sunlight. His parents told him that he would have to marry into that family in the future. For the first time, he did not reject the idea of a family alliance. Instead, he secretly looked forward to it. Unfortunately, his younger brother had recently been pursuing a girl, and the girl had agreed. At 25, just before her wedding, the girl's parents passed away. Dressed in white, she held her head high amidst the whispers. He felt a deep ache for her, but without the position to embrace her, he could only offer gentle words of comfort. Adrian paused. I once thought that in this lifetime I could only silently wish you well. Perhaps God heard my prayers and allowed me to hold your hand. The day his younger brother ran away from the wedding. Hearing the hints in the girl's words, he was so happy he was about to go mad. This time, he bravely played the knight who saves the princess, and he would never let go again. Adrian repeated the wedding vows from that time. Nora, in this life, I will love you, respect you, take care of you, accept you, and remain faithful. I originally thought it was love that arose from nowhere, deep and unwavering. I didn't expect our bond to be this profound. I shed tears of happiness, hanging a love lock with Adrian by the lover's lake. Through thick and thin, unwavering for this life.